How often have you wondered about the neuroscience of social emotion? Well, wonder no more. Our next speaker will set us right. She is an affective neuroscientist and human development psychologist, so a higher life form, who studies the neural, psychophysiological and psychological basis of emotion, social interaction and culture, and their implications for both development and schools. She is Assistant Professor of Education, Rossier School of Education, and Assistant Professor of Psychology, Brain and Creativity Institute, University of Southern California. Please give her a big Sydney welcome, Dr. Mary Helen Immordino-Yang.
Hi, welcome back from lunch. I liked that music. That was very cool. Sets me up well. As you just heard, I'm an affective neuroscientist and a human development psychologist, and I study social emotions. That means the emotions that we have about other people, people we know, people with whom we have relationships, and people whom we don't know and will never meet, but we learn about their situations in various ways, especially in the modern world of technology. And I study how the emotions we have about other people shape the way we feel about ourselves, and you might even say the emotions that we have about ourselves, because what we're learning from social and affective neuroscience is that the experience of being a person, the experience of living a human life, is a socially embedded experience. It's an experience where we have a mind that never exists on its own in isolation. Even when you're alone, that mind is shaped and organized and felt in accordance with the experiences that you've had before, many of those of which are social. And so I titled my talk today, Embodied Brains, Social Minds, to reflect the fact that we have a brain whose original evolutionary purpose is to regulate our body. It's to keep our body alive and functioning in accordance with the demands we place on it from the world. So being able to eat when that's appropriate, being able to run away when that's appropriate, being able to love your child when that's appropriate. Our brain gives us those capacities. But that brain that lives inside our embodied self also gives rise to our social mind. And what we're learning is that there's an incredibly intimate link between the experience, neurobiologically speaking and psychologically speaking, of our embodied brain and the way we feel socially. So our social mind has increasingly, over the course of human evolution, I would argue, co-opted our body and the substrate of our bodily survival and feeling as a platform on which to play out our social lives. And I'm going to argue that to you over the next 25 minutes, and I hope you'll come to see what I mean by that the feeling of the reactions we have in the social world are felt powerfully on the sense of self that we have. And the reason that that's the case is because literally, biologically, they seem to have co-opted, sort of taken over, and made a double use out of the same neural machinery that keeps us alive. Our social life and our biological life are totally intertwined at this stage. And that has, I think, very profound implications for everything you've been learning so far at the conference and for the kinds of lives that we all live. Because it turns out that our social worlds are not separate from our biological bodies. They're lived within the space of our biological bodies and organized according to that logic. So I begin my talk with a painting. Not sure why this isn't advancing. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Got to hold it right side up. I begin my talk with a painting that was done by a friend of mine at University of Southern California, Margaret Lazari. She's the chair of the Fine Arts Department there. And in this painting, I see a beautiful visual metaphor for exactly what I'm talking about. What Margaret did when she created this painting, which is called Aqueous, is she aimed to describe something about the way that our brain is, just as I was saying, not isolated from the rest of the world in which it lives, but instead embodied in an ocean of life that sustains and bolsters us, in a social world of life. And what she's done here, if you look at the painting in the middle, is you can see some sort of white squiggles in this oceanscape. Those white squiggles are actually biological data from our neuroimaging scanner, where we looked at, in one volunteer's brain, the connectivity across the white matter of their brain. So what we've done in this picture is we took off all the little thinking cells around the outside rim of the brain, and we've left behind just their tails, just their little connective little speaking tails that go to talk with everybody else in your brain to make you a whole organized being and not a set of separate thoughts. And so what she's done here is taken that connectivity from one person's life, the connectivity across that brain that's been shaped by that person's experiences from before they were born, all the way up till now, when we take that picture. And she's embedded it in a sea of life. She's got little fish swimming to represent creativity and thoughts and spontaneity of the mind. She's got tides washing back and forth over this brain and kind of bolstering it up and sloshing it back and forth, the tides of culture, the tides of social interaction. And underneath it, she's got weeds and fish and sunlight shining down through it, all these signs of life holding up and warming up that brain. And that's how I understand the brain as a neuroscientist. The brain is not something we can separate from ourselves. It's not something you can put in a bucket in the corner and talk about. It is the thing that makes us us. But it's not isolated from the rest of our world. It's very much embedded, and the connectivity across our brains, the way that we function as an organized whole person, is shaped by these social and cognitive experiences that we have. And so for a moment, I'm just going to indulge you with a story. This is a true story. It's a story about the woman in the blue dress. And if you can see, she's holding up a book that shows pictures of diagrams of a pregnant woman. And she's teaching these other women on the left about the anatomy and physiology of pregnancy, how to do effective prenatal care and safe childbirth. And her story is that this woman is in a very rural part of Sudan. She lives in a place where the population density is so low that there's almost no access to medical care, something like one physician for 16,000 people, and that person is almost always out of reach when you need them. There's almost no access even to elementary level education. And when this woman was a child, she never even had the chance to go to elementary school. She was completely illiterate. Her mother, whom she lived with, was completely illiterate, and they lived fairly alone in an incredibly arid landscape in rural Sudan. And what this situation means for many people, including this woman, is that when they need medical help and when they need information, they don't have the skills to be able to get it, and they don't have the access to other people who do. And when this woman was 13 years old, she found herself in a very heartbreaking situation. She was alone with her mom when her mom went into labor with her baby sister. And unable to read, unable to fetch a doctor, she did not know what to do. And she ended up standing by and watching both her mom and her baby sister die in front of her. And at that experience, as she came to make sense of that experience, she realized that that was not the way of the future, and that she wanted to do something about that for other women in the parts of Sudan in which she lived. But she'd never even been to school, and she had no option of going to school. About 2 years later, she heard tell of a family from Cambridge, England. The mom was a sociologist, the dad was a psychologist, and they had been coming to rural Sudan to do field work, and they brought along their 2 school-age girls, and they were staying for 2 years to study there. And she basically walked to them miles and presented herself and said, as they said say in Africa, I want to be your house girl. I want you to hire me to cook for you and clean for you, to get food for you, to take care of your 2 girls while you're working during the day, to help them with their schoolwork and to help them play safely. And the family took her on. And over the following 2 years, every day, when those 2 little girls would sit down with their books and open them up and study their British curriculum, she would have them explain to her what they were learning. And as a way both for them to come to understand it and for her to learn, over time they became incredibly good friends, and those 2 little girls taught this woman the rudiments of an elementary education. They taught her how to read, they taught her basic calculation skills. And when it was time for them to return back to Cambridge, they were so taken with her that they offered to bring her back with them and to support her. And imagine the courageousness that it took for her to accept that and to leave everything that was familiar in the service of her dream. She went to England, and to make a long story short, as a teenager, she went through the British elementary school system. She went on to secondary school and on to university. From there, she went to medical school in Europe. She eventually became a specialist, fully trained and certified in obstetrics and gynecology. And at that point, she could have very easily stayed in Europe and led a very affluent life and still worked for the cause of her native Sudan, but she didn't. She returned to Sudan, where she now operates a mobile health clinic on a shoestring budget for women in the most rural places, so that they will know how safely to attend childbirth and how to care for themselves and each other when they're pregnant. Yeah, she's amazing. This is a person I actually know, amazingly enough. I've met her, and she's wonderful. So I ask you, because we're in too big of a group, I can't let you respond, and I'm sorry, but I ask you, how does her story make you feel? What does it make you think about? So now I'm going to put on my scientist hat and tell you that that is one. Hers is one of the true stories that we use in a set of experiments that we are running at the University of Southern California and at Beijing Normal University in Beijing to study the neural substrates of compassion and admiration for virtue and inspiration and awe. We tell real stories about real people, and I interview the person about the story and about the meaning they make out of it, and I look for the ways that people individually build meaning and the ways that those meanings are grounded in the experiences that they've had in their life and grounded in the culture in which they've lived. And then we put people in the fMRI scanner and we show them the story again. And I ask them again, how does this story make you feel right now? And I have them respond to me again in the scanner. We take them out, we interview them again. And we use those interviews as well as their responses in the scanner to study what happens in the brain when people are truly inspired by the mental fortitude and virtuousness of another human being. And what we find is quite remarkable. What we basically find is that when you feel inspired about another person's mental fortitude, about the kind of mind that another person has, the way you appreciate that feeling is literally by playing it out on the neural hardware that supports your own bodily survival and consciousness. Literally the same neural mechanisms whose job it is to make your heart beat while you're running around, make you breathe while you're sleeping, monitor your blood pressure and make sure that it stays within safe limits, keep you conscious in the literal sense as opposed to coma. The very same neural systems that do these jobs are being strongly activated when you are in awe of another human being. So I'm going to point out to you just a couple of the neural findings. And then tomorrow in the workshop, those who are interested can delve much more deeply into what this process looks like and what it looks like across cultures and how cultural differences play out and individual differences. First, I'm going to direct your attention to the picture of the brain on the right. That's a slice through one of our participants' brains. Just an image, we didn't hurt anyone. I always have to say that, you never know, okay? But it's a slice through this way. The top of the picture is her forehead, and the back of the picture is the back of her head. And I bring your attention to the two folded pieces of tissue inside here, if you can see them. And I have another view for you. This is from Grey's Anatomy, the textbook, not the TV show. Okay. I always say that. People always laugh. Such a cheap joke. Okay. But if, but if you look at this picture, the eyeball goes in the little crease in the front on your left, okay? And this big piece of tissue that's folded underneath here is called the insula. The insula because it's insulated. If you had a person awake in neurosurgery and their brain and their skull opened up, you could actually peel apart the sylvan fissure, which is a naturally occurring crack there, and look inside and see these huge pieces of tissue. And keep in mind, there are two of them, one on either side. And until about 15 years ago, people really didn't even know what this tissue does, and it's huge compared to the rest of the brain. But there is one thing that we did know about it that we've known for a long time from neurosurgery experiments with patients who are woken back up after their skulls are opened, which is how neurosurgeries are generally undertaken, so the person can tell you what they're experiencing and you know that you're not hurting them. What happens when you poke lightly, stimulate in the front of this region, in the three little V-shaped gyri that are to your left, is that the person reports feeling very nauseated. Sometimes they throw up. Sometimes they get other kinds of gastromotoric responses, which I won't describe to you after lunch. But what we knew about this area is that it is deeply connected to the control and monitoring and sensation of your guts in the literal sense. We wanted to know, when we carried out these social emotions experiments, when people say they feel a lump in the pit of their stomach, when they say they feel a balloon rising in their chest as they admire and become awful of another human being, are they literally feeling that on their real guts? We had another set of regions of interest, which I'll point out to you. If you look at the brain on the left, you can see the nose on the left, okay, and the tongue. That's fairly obvious. And then right in the middle is this big white stem that we call the brainstem. The brainstem is a part of the brain over which you have no conscious control. It's very deeply embedded underneath your cortex. It's very evolutionarily old and developmentally old, so it starts when you're a tiny baby. And right in the middle of that brainstem, above the kind of round bulge in the front, that's the pons, above that is a part called the midbrain. The midbrain is densely packed with tiny nuclei whose job it is literally to keep you alive. They keep you conscious, awake appropriately, asleep appropriately, breathing when you need to be, all these kinds of basic life regulatory functions. We wanted to know, when you feel inspired by another human being, or when you feel compassionate towards another human being, do you literally change the functioning of those nuclei? We were also interested in the tiny bulge right above the spinal cord. So there's a little white line going up, and then the first bulge that looks like something in that brainstem is the medulla. The medulla is a part of your brain that you literally cannot live without. If you damage your medulla, we cannot even keep you alive on life support. Because without defibrillating your heart with every beat and pumping you with air with every breath, you cannot be kept alive. You can't live without it. We wanted to know, when people feel inspired by that woman in Sudan's story, and they say things to me like, she makes me want to examine my own life and wonder, am I doing everything I can be doing to live a purposeful, meaningful life in the circumstances where I am? Am I doing everything I can to help the world and to be a useful human being and to live as a moral self? When people say those things, are they literally changing the biological survival of that self? And what we found is that they are. What you see here is a map. It's a statistical map that averages in special ways what happens in the brain's blood flow system when very many different people across a whole set of experiments told me, yes, right now I am hugely inspired by this woman, or yes, I am very, very compassionate for the situation of people in Sudan. And we look to see what happens in the brain. Orange tells us that there is reliably more blood flow going to these systems. during this time than when they're doing social processing that's not particularly moving, when they're just engaging with a sort of average social story that isn't as compelling. When they say, that's interesting, that's really nice, she did that, but I don't think it is really all that incredibly striking. And we contrast those, and we say to the statistical program, tell me, where are the differences in blood flow, comparing those two conditions? And what do we see? First on the right, huge orange spots over those anterior insula. That's the same part I showed you from the side, but now sliced to this way, right, with the head like this. Huge orange spots. When people say they feel strongly about another situation, they are literally feeling the internal workings of their guts. It's not just metaphor, it turns out. Poets are right. And then I direct you to the brainstem, to these orange spots going down the medulla and the midbrain, that white big stem right in the middle of the picture. Those are the places that literally keep you alive, without which you cannot live, all the way to the bottom of the field of view in the scanner. If you damage that place where the bottom orange spot is, we cannot keep you alive for more than a little while. And yet, when you are admiring that woman in Sudan, you are changing the functioning of those nuclei. Think how powerfully that speaks to the role of the social world in organizing our biological survival. Our biological bodies and our social minds are totally integrated at this point. So this is a picture of my cute nephew, and he's showing me visually with this photograph how the reactions and emotions that we have in the world, whose job it is to literally keep us alive, to keep us off of the edges of cliffs and out from in front of moving buses and out of the mouths of tigers and make us love our babies, are the very same ones that are responsible for our social survival. We feel our social relationships so directly and so painfully and so pleasurably because they literally hook themselves into the biological machinery that keeps us alive. And so I'll end this presentation with another poem, a beautiful poem, I think, for explaining this idea. So many times, artists and poets have presciently gone where we haven't gone yet as scientists and tell us what to look for, because they are students of the human condition. They are mindfully examining the experience of being human and reporting back to us indirectly by creating experiences for us, like poems and like paintings, that allow us to engage with the experience of being human in a more poignant, more deep, more meaningful way. And so I'm going to show you just the very first part of a poem that was written by a man named Stanley Kunitz, who was the Poet Laureate of the United States twice during his lifetime. The first time it wasn't technically called that. And he wrote a poem at age 98 called The Layers, in which he's looking back over the experience of his life, and he's reflecting on what it means to him to have lived, and how it feels to him to be a human being who has come through 98 years of experience. And what he says is that I have walked through many lives, some of them my own, and I am not who I was, though some principle of being abides, from which I struggle not to stray. As a scientist, what that means to me, and I wish I could go back to Mr. Kunitz and ask him, unfortunately he's passed away now, but what that says to me is that just as we're showing with the fMRIs that I just showed you, the experience of being human is not an experience that's separate from your biology, that's divorced from the original purpose of your homeostatic regulation. That means the biology that keeps you alive. Instead, these things are integrated. What does it mean to live a life meaningfully and to look back over it at age 98? It means to walk in that life, to live through the actions of that life, to literally embody yourself in your own life and the feeling of that life. But you don't do it only for one life. You live many lives. And not only do you live many lives, you share others' lives. When you saw the woman in Sudan and you heard her story, once you were able to appreciate the circumstances that she faced, you literally, I would argue, shared a little bit of her life on you. If you experienced an emotion around her mental qualities and her situation, if you felt differently over the course of that story by the end than at the beginning, then you are literally living her life in yours. And the process of doing that changes us. It teaches us. We learn from that and we develop into a new person, a new life, a new way of feeling. That's the reason you come to a conference like this, is to expose yourself to other people's ideas and minds and to integrate the pieces of those that work into your life. You're not who you were after this, but some principle of being abides. That tiny orange spot in the bottom of your medulla, of which you have no conscious knowledge and no conscious control, is there. It doesn't go away until you die. It's the activation that literally is the life force behind both your biological self and your social self. And you struggle to hold that, to keep that, to feel that. That is what a meaningful life entails. That's what it feels like. And so, to close, the idea here is that the reason this conference is so meaningful to you, the reason you feel inspired by it and by the people who've come up here and spoken, is because you are literally changing the state of your own survival and the feeling of that as you engage with these new ways of thinking and ways of being. That's the process of growing that Stanley Kunitz was looking back over. And so before I close, I would just like to thank the many students and mentors who helped me get those orange spots on that picture, because it's a lot harder to do than it would seem. And many, many people are behind me in this effort and helping me with it. So thank you.